Okay, Parshas Beshalach. Vayisu misukos. They traveled to Sukkos. Sukkos was in the Goshen area when the Jews were settled in Egypt. Who was settled in the area was separate from the Egyptians. This was the region of Goshen. They traveled from Sukkos. They went from Ramses to Sukkos. We read last week. Ramses was in the Goshen area, and they traveled to Sukkos, which was 130 miles from there in one moment. It was a miracle. Hashem transported them. We're talking about millions of Jews. In a moment, they went from one location to the next. And they camped in Esom at the edge of the desert. V'yisum Sukkos b'yom hasheni was Sharei Berisha Bo Mi Ramses l'Sukkos, because on the first day they traveled from Ramses to Sukkos. V'Hashem holech lefneim yomam b'amoronon. God is going before them with a pillar of cloud, lantchosam, to lead them. You understand? They had no maps. How did they know exactly how to travel and where to travel? There was a cloud, a pillar of cloud, which led them. V'laylo ba'amud eish lo Elohim. And at nighttime, there was a pillar of fire which illuminated the night. L'leches yom v'loylo says they should be able to travel day and night. Unceasingly, they just kept traveling. Rashi. Lad Chosam, Al Yidei Shaliach. Hashem sent an agent, Umiyah Shaliach, who's God's agent to lead them. Amud Onon, the pillar of cloud. VaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo malich lefneim. And Hashem himself is malich lefneim. What does this mean? Mem. Because it says Hashem malich lefneim. Lo Amud. It says the cloud is leading them, and then it says Hashem holech lefneim. God is going before them. B'amud onon lantchosem. It seems that Amud onon, the pillar of cloud, is leading them. So what does it mean? God is going before them. God is going before the cloud. It's like the cloud is following Hashem. Because es Amud onon heichen lantchosem b'dershel. Yidei Amud onon hem holchem. Amud onon ein lora. The pillar cloud is not to for illumination. Ela rosam aderech, only to show them the way, in what direction to travel. Okay. Lo yomush amud ha'onon yomam, v'amud eish lo lefneim. The cloud, the pillar of cloud during the day, and the pillar of fish at night did not remove itself. What does that mean? Lo yomush ha'kodesh baruch hu amud ha'onon yomam v'amud eish lo. God did not remove the pillar of cloud during the day or the pillar of fire at night. What does that mean? Which means there was never a moment that there was a lapse from one to the other. As one exited, the other one simultaneously came in at that moment. It's interesting. The Gemara tells us in a number of locations, every Shabbos, they had the showbread on the shulchan, 12 loaves of bread, and they would divide the showbread between the Kohanim, the incoming Kohanim, because they would change their watch every Shabbos. Every Shabbos in the late morning, the new group would come in and the old group would go out. And they would divide the showbread on the shulchan. Now, the Torah says the showbread has to be on the shulchan continuously. Tomid. If it has to be tomid, so if they move the showbread, so there's a moment that the shulchan is vacant of the showbread, of the lechem aponim. So how did they do it? They had the new showbread baked already on Friday, And as they removed the old bread, the bread that was there from the previous week, as they slipped it off simultaneously, they slipped the new bread on. So there was never a moment that the shulchan, the surface of the shulchan, was ever vacant. As one was pushed off, the other one was pushed on. Similarly here, there was never a moment that we were left without either the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire. As one exited, at that moment, the other one not simultaneously, but was coming in. So there was never a void, a lapse from one to the other. Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yoshuvu yachnu l'fnei pi achiros. He says, speak to the b'nei Yisrael, and they should return and camp before pi achiros. Here they're fleeing from the Egyptians, but really they're not fleeing. They're traveling with, as it says, when they left Egypt, they left during the daytime. They left in midday. They did not leave like fugitives. They left with power, with glory. So they weren't fleeing to escape. They were not escapees at this moment. And Hashem is leading them. Now Hashem says, I want them to travel back towards the enemy. That they should camp before Pi Achiros. We'll see in a moment. Who is Pi Achiros? There was one deity which Hashem had left that he did not destroy. Every deity of Egypt was destroyed. They were all rendered powerless to show that Hashem is the only power. But he left one of the deities in place. It's called Pi Achiros. Excuse me, it's called Baal Tzefon. We'll see. The Lord of the North, which is in this location. So he says, let them camp before Pi Achiros, which is located between Migdol or Ben Ayom, between Migdol and the sea. That's where its location is. Let's see. Lachareim Rashi, Litzad Mitzrayim, the third day after being out of Egypt, they were traveling towards the Egyptians. Lahatos is Paro, to mislead Paro, that he should say that they're lost. They're traveling, they don't know where they're going. And they camp. What is this Pi Achiros? What is this location? We had it initially when they instituted the bondage. There were two cities that had to be fortified. One was called Pisom and Ramses. Pisom was that other city. Why is it called Pi Achiros? Where did the bondage start? The bondage started when they were given the task to rebuild, to fortify Pisom. Now Pisom is called Pi Achiros, from the word Cherus, freedom. Why? Because the Jews became Bnei Chorin. It's two large stones, which are vertical, like two vertical stones. And the valley between these two like stone walls is called Pi Asloim. Now, it's very interesting. I had mentioned when we studied the portion of Shmos, there was the question, there was Pisom and Ramses, and they were given the task to fortify these cities. And there's an argument in Midrash, the Maral, in his work, Kavur Hashem speaks about this, an argument with Rav and Shmuel, that as they completed building these cities, either they just crumpled, as they reached the final stone in, or the final rock, it just crumpled, or as they built it, it sank into the ground. Meaning that whatever they did was an act of futility. It had no value. There was no end result. So Maral of Prague explains what was going on over there. Why did he give him the task to complete these cities which had to be fortified, to build these cities? So he explains that Paro believed that everything in existence, as we discussed in Rabbeinu Bachya, that the title of the monarch of Egypt was Paro, and the letters Ayin Pei Resh, which is Ophir, is the core of that name. Everything in existence is physical and earthy. Everything is finite. There's nothing infinite that has any relevance to this existence. And therefore he said, Me Hashem Hashem Koldo. When Moshe came, he says, I'm the agent of Yud Kei Vav Kei. He says, who's this Yud Kei Vav Kei? It has no relevance to existence. Now, what Moshe was saying, that the Jewish people are this infinite beings, it's his people. Meaning, although we are physical beings, but our core, our essence, is something which cannot be fathomed and cannot be quantified. The Jewish people cannot be quantified. Because what is the value of the Jewish people? As we say, schar b'al maleka, when a Jew does a mitzvah, the Jew generates an energy that to be rewarded for that energy, if you could live 1,000 years and be rewarded unlimited at an unlimited level, it's not sufficient. Reward, schar b'al maleka. Schar, reward in this world cannot be. It's only the world to come. So Paro said, I reject what you're telling me. You're trying to convince me something which is unacceptable, and I'll prove my point. Because how do you quantify a person? By his accomplishments, by his gross national product. That's how you quantify a people. You know what the Jewish people are? I'm going to give them a task to build these unfortified cities, which need fortification. And at the end of the day, this is their value. This is their worth. That they're able to build these 2 cities to fortify them. Hashem says you make a big mistake. The moment they're completed, they're going to crumple. That's the argument. Did they crumple? And they reverted back to just rubble? Or no, that it sank in the ground? And the Maral goes to explain what's the difference between crumpling and being pulverized or sinking in the ground. But that was the discussion here. Why did he give us that task? So it's interesting. Piachiros was originally, he says, was Piso. That was the city we fortified. Today it's called Piachiros because we became Bnei Chorin. When we left Egypt and we chased out of Egypt as a result of the Makas Bechoros, what did that prove to Paro at this moment? That the infinite God, that the existence has more to do than with the finite. There's an infinite element, component to this existence. And this existence, which is finite, is only finite and willed by a power which is infinite. And that was proven through the Makas Bechoros. So now when they come to Pisom, which initially was the first proof to Paro, and he wanted to quantify us, to say, this is your reality, today it's called Piachiros. It's called the location of freedom, because we became Bnei Chorin. The Bnei Chorin was as a result of Paro recognizing, at least at the moment, that God has full control. He's not limited to anything. Originally, if we read the portion of Balak commissioned Bilam to curse the Jews, to destroy us. He didn't succeed over and over again. So Balak was getting a little impatient and upset with him. And he says, here you're boasting that you're able to curse the Jews and just remove them from the face of the earth. And here, every time, God has a leash on you. Whenever you want to open your mouth, he puts a bit in your mouth. You can't even say what you want to say. He says to him, which was really a remark, which was under the belt. He says, originally it was known that a slave cannot escape from Egypt. Why? Because Bilam, being a sorcerer, he cast a spell around Egypt and a visual wall. Nobody could escape from Egypt. So he says Balak says to Bilam, you originally promised the Egyptians, there will not be a slave that's able to escape. Not only did a slave not escape, a whole nation escaped. Who are you? What's your worth? This is what Balak said to Bilam. Bilam got a little upset and he spoke disrespectfully to Balak. But again, that was the point. Originally, it was Piso. Everything is finite. You're locked in. If you're God's people, we're not locked in. Of course, the infinite is the basis for the finite. So because we became Bnei Chorin, the location which initially he wanted to prove that we were finite, it was proven that we're infinite. Therefore, Bnei Chorin, and that's the reason ultimately it says in Pirkei Avos, Ezel ben Chorin, Piachiros. What is the luchas are called? Cherus, Elucha ben Chorin el Mishosik b'Talmud Torah. When you connect with God through Torah, you're ben Chorin. There's no limitation. You take on an unlimited persona when you connect to Torah, because Torah itself is God's wisdom. So Rashi says it was what? Lifnei Baal Tzfon. This location was before the Lord of the North. Nichacho Sachno Alayom. Opposite, you should camp by the sea. So we're camping by the sea, as we said, opposite Baal Tzfon. Now, what's this Baal Tzfon, the Lord of the North? So Rashi himself explains. Who Nishar Mikol Elohei Mitzrayim. This is the only deity which remained from all the gods of Egypt. They were all destroyed. To mislead Paro. Shiyomru Koshi Roson. To communicate that they should believe that their God, their deity, is so powerful that even God himself is not able to destroy that power. For all of Pirush Eov. And regarding this particular incident, Job says, Mashki la goyim v'abdeim. God misleads the nations and ultimately to destroy them. This was the hook. This was the attraction for Paro, convincing him that although, like we had by the Borod, when the Borod took place, the hail, before he realized that the wheat and spelt crop was spared, what did he say immediately? Because he saw the end. He believed that God destroyed everything. So he said, Hashem HaTzadik, Ani Bami Rishoyim. The moment he realized that the wheat and spelt crop was spared, he says, if God is all powerful, why didn't he destroy the wheat and spelt crop? So what did he do? He retracted. He said, you're not going out. Because he said, evidently, the God of the wheat and the God of the spelt, that power, God wasn't able to destroy. But again, that was only to mislead him. That he's convinced that there's a power outside of God. Now, God destroys all of them, all the powers of Egypt. He leaves one, the Baal Tzfon. Why? Again, that they should believe what we believed until now was really a mistake. Because we see there is a God, one of the deities is still in place, the Lord of the North. But again, quotes the pasuk in Eov, in Job, Mashki goyim vayabdim. He misleads the nations only to send them into the oblivion, to destroy them. Because believing this, they're going after the Jews. And why are they going after the Jews, really? It's not only to bring them back. They took all the personal wealth of the Egyptians. And as a result of that, they're going to recoup, to retake what's rightfully theirs. And that's why the Sifano learns, initially, when we were told to borrow the personal valuables of the Egyptians, Hashem says to Moshe, Daben no bosneom. Please speak to the people and convince them that they must borrow. So he explains why, because if we would have left without taking the personal belongings of the valuables of the Egyptians, as much as Paro would have wanted them to go after us, they wouldn't have listened. Why? Because they were beaten so badly, they're not listening, they're not going. Because they have nothing to gain. What's there to gain? It's all risk. There's nothing to gain. Because who's going to be the one to gain? Paro, because he's the king. But the citizenry, what do they have to gain? Nothing. But since we took their valuables, we left them penniless. They were literally left destitute. So now every Egyptian now has what to go after us to regain what we took from him. Therefore, initially, that's why Moshe said, Hashem said to Moshe, Dabin no bosneom. Please tell them to borrow, because they understood that if they borrow and they're not coming back, not only is Paro coming after them, but all the Egyptians are coming after them. To retake what we misled them, because they were duped, we took everything and they were left penniless. Paro will say about the Jewish people, they are locked into the land. The desert is closed upon them. They can't escape. Now, but you understand, from saying to doing is a whole different level. The chizakti is like Paro. I will strengthen his heart. And that will cause him to pursue you. pursue them. The Kovdu B'Farv'chol Kechelo. And God says, now I will be glorified through Paro and all his armies. Why? Because then they will all be destroyed. V'yodu Mitzrayim Kini Hashem. And then Egypt will know, the Egyptians will know, I am Hashem. Which Egyptians? The Egyptians that are going to perish in the sea, or after the fact, the Egyptians in Egypt will know that God is the all control, is the only power. V'yodu Mitzrayim Kini Hashem. The Yasuchain. The Jews did. The Jews traveled back to the enemy. He says, I will be glorified through Paro and his army. So again, who hischil ba'avera? Who initiated the bondage? Paro. And then his people. We find by all the plagues, the frogs, it entered into the whole house of Paro, his servants, and then his subjects. By the locust. Paro, Avodov, and then the Egyptians. Here, when he will destroy them, I will be glorified through Paro, Ubechol Chelo, and his armies. Umen Hischa Aporanos. V'yasu Cain, listen to this, and the Jews did exactly as they were told. Lahagid Shvochon, to speak the praiseworthiness of the Jews, Sheshamu L'Kol Moshe. They heeded the words of Moshe. Lo Omru Heich Niskarev El Rodfenu. They didn't say, but how can we go travel towards our pursuers? It's suicide. Anu Tzrichim Levroach. I mean, here we're fleeing. How do we travel in the opposite direction? El Omru, what did they say? They had such a level of faith in Hashem. Ein Loru El Divrei Ben Amram. All we have are the words of Ben Amram. Whatever he says, we listen. Now, what's interesting, Rashi cites the Chazal, Sheshamu L'Kol Moshe. They listened to the voice of Moshe. What is the voice? If you remember, when Sari Menu had said to Avram, you must drive the maidservant and her son from the home. And Ishmael was the first child of Avram. It wasn't simple. So Hashem says to Avram, you should listen, L'Kol Sari Shtecho. You should listen, it doesn't say you should listen to Sari, your wife, what she's telling you, L'Kol. You should listen to her prophetic voice. The word kol is alluding to her prophetic voice. And over there, Rashi cites Chazal that Sarah Imenu was a greater prophetess than Avram was. Therefore, you should heed what she says. What she says, she and her son should be driven from the home, regardless of what you understand. You should heed her voice, her prophetic voice. Over here, they said, like Shochan Shishamu LeMoshe. They listened to Moshe. Moshe has been right 10 out of 10, but there's nothing to worry about. They have that level of faith. They're being led through the pillar of cloud during the day, the pillar of fire at night, and Moshe, everything's going perfectly. They listened to Kol Moshe. What did that mean? Not they'd listen to Moshe. They saw Moshe was imbued with what? With the Shekhinah, that he was a prophet. And as a result of that, they listened to his voice. It's not his voice. It's L'Kol Moshe. It's the prophetic voice of Moshe. As it says over there, L'Kol Sarishdecha, it's the prophetic voice of Sarah to indicate that she was a great prophetess than Avram Avinu. Just pointing this out. You know, Rashi, every word he writes with a specific intent. Rashi doesn't write, there's nothing to be shown him, right, about Rashi, that he is considered the ultimate commentator. Nobody was the equivalent of Rashi. And I mentioned that Rav Avad Yosef cites a Meiri, that the Meiri writes that Rashi was so exact in his commentary that if the Rishonim understood all the nuances of Rashi's writings, they would understand, they would never have a question. It's only because they fully didn't grasp Rashi, therefore they ask questions. But if they would understand what Rashi's saying to its fullest, they would never have a question. They'd understand exactly where Rashi's coming from. You know, Rashi is a very interesting commentary. You could have a 5-year-old child learning Rashi, and you could have the Ramban learning Rashi. Could you imagine? There was such siyata d'shmaya. It was written definitely Ruach HaKodesh. the amount that Rashi had written in his lifetime, Rashi passed away in his 70s. He wrote his commentary on Tanakh. He wrote his commentary on Shas. He wrote a commentary on the Rif. And he wrote, there were 3 scripts. He wrote three commentaries on Shas. The one we have is the third one he'd written. He perfected it. In one lifetime, how does a man write so much? Just to be able to put it to paper. It's unbelievable. That means he wrote with unceasingly the time. And he was, he had an occupation. He had to support himself. So he was involved in other things. It's like the Rambam. The Rambam was a physician. Yet he wrote the Rambam, the Yad Chazoka, and he wrote many other things. He wrote Sefer HaMitzvahs, and he wrote certain letters. And this is the foundation for halacha, the Rambam. It's like we can't even relate to it. But the interesting thing is, Rambam, you have to be an advanced Talmud Chacham to really appreciate Rambam. The Rashi, they teach Rashi to, as I said, 5-6-year-old child in elementary school, and the most advanced sage who's proficient in everything, he studies Rashi too, and he tries to figure out what Rashi's saying. And every one has a takeaway because that's how profound the commentary is.
Rabbi?
But Yugad Lemelch Mitzrayim ki vorach ha'om. It was told to the king of Egypt that the people fled. It should say Kiborach Yisrael, right? That the Jews fled. What does it say Kiborach ha'om? And it's interesting. It starts V'yugad Lemelch Mitzrayim. It was told to the king of Egypt that the people fled. Ve'yehovech levav Paro. And then Paro had a change of heart. And meaning, and what did he do? Va'avodav Elohim. Va'yomru ma'zos asidi ki shlachni Yisrael me'avdeinu. He heard Paro, the king of Egypt, heard that the people fled. And therefore, Paro, we're going from the king of Egypt to Paro, had a change of heart and his subject, and his avodim towards the people. And they said, Mazos asinu ki shlachnos Yisrael me'avdeinu. We're switching from the people, to Yisrael. So over here, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh explains, as I mentioned the other day, when he sent us out, the rabble that was sent out with us, that was to be a guarantee that the Jews are coming back. So he told them that if you don't make sure the Jews come back, you people are going to assume all the workload of the Jews, and you're going to become the slaves. So Paro believed that would be a guarantee that the Jews are coming back. Because there's no way they're going to let the Jews not come back if that's the kind of lives they're going to lead. So what happened? The rabble realized there's no way to hold the Jews from not coming back. They're not coming back. So Yisrael are the Jews. The are referring to the rabble. So you know what happened? When the rabble realized that the Jews are not coming back, they said, something, we're not going back. We're fleeing from Egypt. Because if we go back, what are we going back to? To become slaves and experience what the Jews experienced. We're not going back. So therefore, it says, Kivorach ha'om. It was told to the king, the people fled. Who the people? The people referring to the rabble. He had a change of heart, and they said, what did we do? We shilachnu es Yisrael me'avdeinu. We shouldn't have sent out the Jews initially, because we thought we had a guarantee that the Egyptians would replace them. Now that even the rabble left, so we made a mistake. We shouldn't send out the Jews initially, because now we have the financial backbone of Egypt doesn't exist anymore. Because at least until now we believe that the people, the rabble, they would be able to assume that responsibility, take over that workload. But now, not only did the Jews flee, Kivorach ha'om. That's how the Orach Chaim learns this pasuk. That's why there's a switch from to Yisrael. But what I want to point out, it was told to the king of Egypt that Borach ha'om. What does the king of Egypt represent? Paro is the individual. King of Egypt represents his power. It was told to the king of Egypt, Borach ha'om. If the Borach ha'om means the people left, the rabble is not coming back, that means he's reduced from king to Paro. You're called Paro, but you're no longer Melech Mitzrayim. The Melech Mitzrayim, which is the financial power, that's gone. You're as a leader, as the ultimate civilization, financially, that's history. That's not coming back. So it was told to the king of Egypt, Baruchom, the Yofich left Paro. But Paro, as the individual, says, what did we do? Why do we send out the Jews? Because now we see what we believe to be a guarantee, which will guarantee our financial foundation. We made a mistake because we shouldn't have sent out the Jews, because the whole thing was a mistake. Because the guarantee is not holding. So therefore we go from Melech Mitzrayim to Paro. Where did we see this before? We had this before. We're gonna have to stop here. We had it when Paro summoned the midwives, Shivra and Puah. He summoned them as Melech Mitzrayim. Meaning he understood what his power was. He spoke to them as the king of Egypt. And then when he heard that they did not follow his order, he allowed the Jewish children to live. He summoned them as Melech Mitzrayim, as the king of Egypt. When Shivra and Puah spoke to Paro, you know what it's referred to? They spoke to Paro. He speaks as king of Egypt, and they speak to him, you're Paro. Why? The Terena Hamiyalus is Elokim, because they feared God. Therefore, you know something? Being the king of Egypt to us means nothing. The one who's the power is Hashem. Therefore, when they responded to him, it says they spoke to Paro, not to the king of Egypt. When he spoke to them, he spoke to them as the king of Egypt. When he summoned them, it was the king of Egypt. He was flexing his muscle. But how did they take it? You know, something Paro. Why did they see him as Paro, as the individual? Because they fear Hashem. Okay, we're going to stop here on the